So after understand the structure change in the labor force, next we'll move on to learn the structure change in the GDP. As we mentioned, the GDP is the index to measure the economic growth. And then the key for this chapter, for this lecture, is try to understand the economic growth and the structural change. So how the GDP has changed for the past decades. So first of all, I want to give you a little comparison between China and US GDP, recent GDP. So the US GDP was $20.54 trillion in 2018, which is about 60% larger than China's GDP. So China's GDP in 2018 is 13.9 trillion. 13.9 trillion. And so obviously, China and the US had a very similar size, the land mass. However, the GDP wise, US is much, much larger. So at this point, and you might say, oh, China is really developing country. You are right, China is a developing country. However, for the past decades, and China has made a great progress. So what we're going to focus on in this video is try to look at how each sector contributes to the GDP and how each sector has changed for the past decades. So when we talk about the structure change for the GDP, we have to mention about the price level and the real GDP growth. And so before 1978, and we talk about the big push industrialization, and the key here is before 1978, China is literally government fully controlled economy. So Chinese government decide how much the goods should be charged. So between 1949 and 1978, since government tried very hard to push the development of the manufacturing or industrial sector, and actually government set a very high price for the industrial goods, so which actually causing a problem, that is overstate industrial output. And so during that period of time, agriculture only take 28% of the GDP, manufacturing is 48%, and the service 24%. And what I want to emphasize that is that during that period of time, the measurement is inaccurate because the government is control the price, so they purposely inflate the manufacturing goods. And so if we take the price level as a consideration, what we found is all three sectors actually have grown at a very similar rate. So the manufacturing industry doesn't really grow as what we expected before 1978. So how about after 1978? After 1978, as we mentioned before, and so China adopted economic reform, and this reform is allow China to follow like the US to adopt the market-driven economy. So let market play a main role to guiding the economic behaviors. So this works great because it has eliminated the distortion of the real measurement of the GDP. So during this post-1970 reform, so many of the distortion imposed on the price system by the government pre-1978 were eliminated. So the gradual opening of the economy to competition and international trade, along with the elimination of the government price control, drove down the relative price of the manufactured goods compared with the service and agriculture products. Industry displayed the lowest rate of inflation, while at the same time enjoying the highest rate growth, real growth rate in the economy. So that's why if we roll back to the third slide, and you will be able to see a significant increase since 1978. So we have to thank for the reform of the economy. And so between 1978 to 1919, and we see in China is we have a very moderate growth, and especially we saw the agriculture sector decrease slowly, service sector grow quickly, and the industrial sector grew slowly. And after 1991, so we can see this is the rapid burst in terms of the GDP structural change. And so after in 1991, the Chinese government decided to renew of the economic reform, so which means they try to re-emphasize, open up the China's international trade. and try to more encouraging the market dominant economy instead of the government dominant economy. So we did see after 1991 a rapid growth in the industrial sector, and so we see a great contribution. The great contribution of the GDP is coming from the industrial sector, and at the same time we did see the total GDP, the real GDP, grow very quickly as well. So how about the structure change affecting globalization? So China, the industrial share in 2004 was extremely high, and the industry, including mining, petroleum extraction, and utility, which of course vary substantially across countries and which are not particularly large in China. For international comparative purpose, it is most useful to compare the share of the GDP that is produced in manufacturing. In China, manufacturing makes up 3/4 of the overall secondary sectors, industrial sectors. And so, I know everybody heard about before, China is the manufacturing, the world's factory. And so actually, I put a question mark here because it is start to change since 2 or 3 years ago. China no longer be world's largest manufacturer. Actually, Vietnam become the China largest manufacturing, and the symbolized event is Nike moved their largest shoe manufacturing from China, move it to Vietnam, and so many simple manufacturing industry has moved to the Vietnam. So Vietnam now become world's factory, and however during the 2004 to the past decades, it is very important China play a role as the world's largest manufacturing. It helped the GDP growth in China, and so for this video, I want to emphasize that what we're gonna see in China is no longer the world largest factory. China has seen the manufacturing decline in 2.5 years in 2008. So the official purchasing management index fell to 49.4 in December, below critical 50-point level that separated growth from contraction, according to the data released by the National Bureau of the Statistics. So what does that mean? That means China's economy started to slow down because one of the reasons is many international company who used to manufacturing their product in China, they are shift to the surrounding country of China, and so China has to figure out a new way to keep their economic growth. So that's why we see the artificial intelligence, and China start to explore a new world like Africa, and they promoting the new policy called One Road, One Belt, and they try to using this way to stimulate their economy because China cannot no longer be the world factory. So the structural change and the globalization, it play a very important role to reshape the economic growth in China. And so when we visit China, I hope you can find the evidence that support China has shifted from the world's largest factory to the new era that is the technology dominated instead of manufacturing dominated. So to conclude this chapter, China economic growth has been accompanied by the structural change. So we can see starting from agricultural predominant economy, and then slowly switch to the industrial dominated economy. So which is starting in 2004, and now start to switch to service dominated, and as China no longer be the world largest manufacturing. Instead, it is start to move on to offering more services and exploring the new international market. And China definitely has a very unique growth path. And the main reason is China is a government-dominated economy, and it's starting from a pure government-dominated and to the market mixed economy mechanism. And now, and so China is more market-dominated economy, and the government just play a very important role to do the adjustment. And also in this chapter, we look at a couple of very important benchmark. For instance, the big push industrialization, which is between 1949 to 1978. and also economic reform starting from 1979, and also the renewal of the economic reform starting from 1991. So those are very important benchmarks. So those benchmarks set China's unique growth path of the GDP.